Inside of Autograph, there is a powerful cloner generator. So powerful it is, in fact, that we could probably spend an entire training series just talking about what you can do with the cloner. But what I want to do here is just start from scratch and give you some of the basics so you can start kind of playing around with it in a more intelligent way. When I was playing around with the cloner at first, there were a few things that tripped me up, and so I'd love to help you avoid that if I can. So what I'm going to do here in a brand new composition, I'm going to press Shift Q to get a new generator, or I could also click this button right here if I wanted to do that, and make a cloner from scratch. I realize we have nothing to clone, but again, because of the way that the cloner works and the way that Autograph works, we go to the template section and we can just create a generator right here. Now, if we had some other object that we'd imported, a graphic or something like that we wanted to use, we can drag and drop it from the project panel to the generator icon of the template here and make that the template. Template is the name of the thing that gets cloned inside of the cloner. But again, I'm just going to click this little generator here and we're just going to start from scratch. Let's just say that I'll start with a polygon. Simple white's a little on the boring side, so let's just give it some kind of color. Sure, that's fine. Now, one thing to be aware of a little bit, this is kind of important just before we get started, that what we did is we created a cloner generator. If we look at the layer source, we could see here on the left with the blue outline that this is a cloner generator. Now, don't follow along here, but if I created a shape here, another like a shape layer, and on my shape layer, I can go to my path group and go to the modifiers of my path group and choose a path cloner. So the path cloner is specific for vector shapes, and the cloner here is a generator for everything. So again, the regular cloner we're going to be talking about in this tutorial is a generator, and there's also a path cloner, which is a modifier, but only on shape layers. So delete that, just be aware of that. Now, the term dimensions used here in the cloner refers to how many sets of clones that there are. So for example, we have one dimension currently, we have one object that we're cloning, and we can clone it 3 times. This is what this is saying. The size is the number of clones. And if we wanted to take these 3 clones and then duplicate those 3 clones, we would add another dimension. So basically adding a dimension allows you to clone your clones. Now let's make a little bit more. Let's maybe make 6 clones, and we're not seeing anything here. I could go into instance transform, I could adjust the position, and we don't see any clones whatsoever. I'm just going to zero that out. Well, the reason why is we need to use something called accumulate transform, and I'll explain why we need to do this in a moment. But once I choose accumulate transform, then as we adjust, let's say the X position, we will start to see those clones. And what's happening is that these 189 pixel offset is applying to every subsequent clone. If I take scale to 0.9, then each clone is going to be 9/10 of the scale of the previous clone. I could add a little bit of rotation, let's say maybe 20 degrees, and then each clone is going to be rotating 20 degrees, but it's going to be using this main anchor point. So I can actually adjust the anchor point and get some really kind of beautiful adjustments, spirals and such. Maybe I'll crank up the dimension size a little bit, get some spirals there by fiddling with anchor point. Really, you could do some pretty cool tricks with this. Now, let's go ahead and maybe adjust some of these attributes here. Maybe I'll take down the anchor point and maybe adjust the Y a little bit so we have a little bit more space between our clones. We could see a little bit better. Now let's hold this thought about the accumulate transform. We're going to come back to that. But one of the more powerful things that we can do is use a random generator. So what I need to do is go to my polygon, and I'm going to actually, let's see here, open up the source, cloner, and then template polygon. I can click on polygon there and I could get the attributes for the polygon. And then I want to go to the color property and click on the generator and add a random generator. And it's going to add a random color value to my clones. And as I move, you can see that it's adjusting every frame. It's giving me a different color. And that's because it's set up to do that. Between black and white, it could pick any color, and it varies according to time. But what's really cool is I could change this to instance, and then it gives every one of my clones a different color because it can recognize the instances in a cloner, even though it's a separate thing. So we are cloning, just to be clear of like what's happening here, we are adjusting the random generator of the color attribute of a polygon that we are using inside the cloner. And still, the cloner can recognize the instance value in this buried random value. So in other words, if you had anything, something using instances anywhere throughout your project, even in subcompositions, then a cloner, even at the top level, will recognize in any attribute of anything, it's going to see the instance value and apply that to cloned values, which is really cool. Now, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and remove random because I don't want to do that. I want to talk about something else. I'm actually going to adjust these properties here so we have something a little bit different. I'm going to go to the rotation value and kind of like reset this a little bit and maybe bring these in a little bit closer. Okay, so there we go. So now I want to adjust the randomness of the position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off accumulate transform and go to position and create a random generator. And just as before, we're going to change this varying from time to instance. And because position has like a bigger value than 0 to 1, we're going to crank up this maximum value. And so now you can see what we're doing is that we're spreading these attributes out. And a lot of times when you're using a cloner, you're going to want to use this random generator because it comes in handy so much and because it recognizes instances. And actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll take down the minimum to bring some of those clones back, maybe tone down this maximum value so get something a little bit closer to the center there. And maybe now we'll go back to my cloner, go to the scale attribute, same thing. Maybe we'll give this a random generator, and we'll also, again, maybe increase the minimum, and then the maximum, we could go to like 1.2 or something like that. And again, we want to vary instance. By the way, we could also vary time and instance. So if you wanted each clone to vary in time and have its own value different from the other instances, you could use time and instance, which is pretty cool. For now, I'm just going to choose instance though. Now, if we go back to the cloner here, you'll notice that accumulate transform is turned off because remember that attribute that I mentioned earlier on about clones, where each clone, when we talked about the scale, for example, where it was 0.9, and then each clone is 9/10 the size of the other one. And that is when we accumulate the transform. That's what that means. It's accumulating the transform from clone to clone. But if you're going to use random, which is one of the ways that's very common to control these clones in Autograph, if you choose accumulate transform, then you have the randomness, and also you are having these attributes adjust for every clone. And so it gets messy. And so oftentimes when you're using random, which again is a very common thing to do, then you don't want accumulate transform on as well. And that's why that's off by default. Or perhaps another way to say that is that the random generator and accumulate transform often don't play well together unless you kind of really know what you're doing. Now, let me show you one other trick with clones and coloring those clones, because maybe you want these colors to be different than that. Maybe you want them to follow a gradient, and there's a cool trick that we can do. So basically, like, we want to do this. We want to take this color and have it follow a gradient. Well, what happens is that we go to the cloner and we can go to our, whatever our template is. In this case, I use a circle and just kind of like skewed it a little bit. So that's why it looks like that. I added a sample gradient generator, which you can do from this drop down right here, just sample gradient. And so it's being colored with this sample gradient. And I added this kind of like fiery color scheme, which is why I wanted to do it ahead of time, because I didn't want to take time in the tutorial to choose all of these colors and get these all right. But basically, this value parameter is determining where in the gradient the color is applied. So 0 is on the far left, and 1 is on the far right. So if I take this to 1, it's going to have this color. If I take it to 0.5, it's going to take the color from right in the middle, and the default of 0 is going to give it the color on the far left, which is kind of like this like charcoal gray color. Now, how would we get this gradient to map across all of those clones evenly? Well, basically what we need to do is we need to tell this value to not go from just like 0 to 1 in one clone. We need to say go from 0 at the first clone to 1 at the end of the other clone. So we need to do two steps, two quick and easy steps. I'm going to add a generator to this value. I'm going to add an instance index. So the instance index generator basically applies the number of the clone, like whatever one it is, whether it's the first clone or second clone or whatever, and applies it to the gradient. So essentially, that 0 gray color gets applied to that first clone. That's clone 0. The next one is 1, so it has the yellow applied to it. And then every other one is brighter than that, so then that has the yellow applied to it as well. So we're on the right track here, but instead of going from 0 to 1 of those first clones, we need to stretch this 0 to 1 across all of our clones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the sample gradient, back to the value parameter here, and I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to add a math modifier. And what we want to do is divide this 0 to 1. We want to divide this over the number of our clones so that this is 0 and then this is 1 over here. So what we need to do is get the value of our clones. If I go back to my clones and I have a value of 22 here, then I want to go back to the math and divide by 22. And there you go. But this is not a dynamic way to do things, because if I go back to my cloner and adjust this, then it's not going to be 0 to 1 anymore. And if I go further than that, it's just going to be straight to that yellow color, because this is all past 1 essentially. So a smarter way to do this, or maybe a more effective way to do this, is I can right click on this dimension size, the number of my instances, copy this, go down to my math value, go down to the value of how much we're dividing this by. And what I want to do is do paste linked. Paste linked. So now when I adjust my cloner, the dimension size, in other words, the number of my clones, then the entire gradient is going across the spectrum of my clones. However many clones there are, it's going from 0 to 1. So anyways, my point here is I want to just introduce you to the cloner, introduce you to this accumulate transform, introduce you to random and using instances and the kind of like catch-22 there that you want to be aware of. I want to show you how powerful it all is, because we just really scratched the surface with these first attributes and none of this other stuff, such as adjusting the opacity and accumulating the opacity to fade out the clones and all this kind of stuff. There's just so much more to it. I just want to, again, give you a basic introduction. But also I want to show you too that with, as we're talking about sample gradient and the value and the instance index and the modifiers, I also want to show you kind of like the subtext of this is that the more you understand Autograph, the more you're going to be able to get out of all parts of Autograph. So the more you understand generators and modifiers, the more you're going to be able to get out of the cloner and the rest of the features in Autograph as well.